Welcome back to True Crime After Dark. Tonight's story begins just after midnight, when the world is quiet, when most of us assume we're safest inside our own homes. But for one young couple in Vallejo, California, the darkness outside their window was hiding something far more sinister than either of them could have imagined. Because in just a few moments, a quiet night would turn into every couple's worst nightmare. They wouldn't know it yet, but they were about to become the center of one of the most controversial, disbelieved, and publicly mocked kidnapping cases in modern history. A case the police dismissed, the news media laughed at, and the internet compared to Gone Girl. But this was no storybook fiction. This was real, and it was happening right now. The house was dim, the bedroom lit only by the soft glow of a digital clock on the nightstand. 3 a.m. Denise Huskins lay asleep beside her boyfriend, Quinn. The young couple had been through a rough patch recently. Arguments, a brief breakup, an attempt to reconcile. They were still rebuilding trust. Things felt fragile, but hopeful. And tonight, for the first time in a long while, they'd fallen asleep believing everything might be okay. But peace lasted only seconds. Because suddenly, a loud crash, a burst of blinding light. Footsteps, fast, heavy, determined. Aaron jolted awake. Before he could even process what was happening, he heard voices, male voices, multiple. "Don't move. Hands where we can see them." The brightness was overwhelming. Military-grade flashlights aimed directly at their faces. They couldn't see shapes, only silhouettes. Figures dressed in black, faces covered, movements tactical, controlled. Like they'd done this before. Aaron's first thought, police raid. Had he done something wrong? Was this some mistake? Was this a dream? But then, zip ties. Plastic restraints pulled tight around his wrists. This was not police procedure. His heart began pounding, fast, violent, like it was trying to escape his chest. Beside him, Denise gasped, trembling. A voice barked at her. "Face down, don't scream, comply, no one gets hurt." The intruders moved with eerie calmness. No yelling, no chaos. Their tone was chillingly professional, almost rehearsed. One held a gun inches from Aaron's head, while another secured Denise. They placed blackout goggles over their eyes, completely blinding them. Then, earbuds. One by one, earphones were shoved into their ears. A pre-recorded message began playing in a cold, robotic monotone. "You are being taken hostage. This is a financial operation. Do not resist. Do not call police. Comply, and you will live." Aaron's breathing grew shallow. He tried to speak, beg, plead, anything. But a voice hissed, "Don't move." The message in his ear repeated over and over, like brainwashing. Then, "We only need one of you." A pause. "She's coming with us." Denise didn't speak, didn't scream. She was too stunned even to cry. Aaron tried to twist toward her, but something hard struck the back of his head. He collapsed, motionless. Was he unconscious? Had they drugged him? Was he dying? He could hear, but he couldn't move. Footsteps, rustling. Denise being lifted, struggling softly, but not resisting. She didn't want to provoke them. She was carried away, out of the room, out of the house. And Aaron, paralyzed, blind, helpless, lay there, listening to the sound of his girlfriend being stolen from their bed. What he didn't know was that at this exact moment, the clock was already ticking against them. Because in just a few hours, law enforcement would arrive. The investigation would begin. And instead of searching for Denise, they would accuse Aaron of making the entire thing up. And that was only the beginning. Time became strange. Aaron wasn't sure if he'd been unconscious for minutes or hours. He drifted in and out, the drug in his system making everything swim and warp in his head. The recorded voice in his ear kept looping. "Comply and you will survive. Do not contact law enforcement. We are watching, we are armed. Any deviation will result in termination." Eventually, he forced his eyes open beneath the goggles. They were opaque, but he could sense light shifting. His hands were still zip-tied. His head still throbbed. And Denise was gone. He lay there on the bedroom floor, muscles heavy, limbs numb, heart pounding so loudly he could hear it in his earpiece. For long moments, he couldn't move. When the drugs finally loosened their grip, he managed to roll onto his side, then drag himself upward, using the side of the bed for balance. The goggles were sealed tight. He couldn't see a thing. His wrists were locked behind him. His speech was slurred from whatever they'd injected him with. But the house was quiet. Too quiet. The men were gone. And so was Denise. Minutes passed, or maybe an hour. When he could finally stand, he stumbled until he found something. A corner, a wall, the edge of a dresser. He wasn't sure. His hands trembled violently as he worked the zip tie against a sharp edge. It cut into his skin, but he kept sawing, gritting his teeth, breathing in panicked bursts. Finally, snap, one hand free, then the other. He tore off the goggles and earbuds. The house was dim, silent, empty. But something else hit him with a fresh wave of dread. They said not to call police. They said they were watching. But if he didn't call, and something happened to her, how long until she was dead? Aaron paced in a shaky half-stumble to the living room, the drugs still clouding his mind. His phone was there. He hesitated. Would he doom her by calling police, or doom her by staying silent? Somewhere deep in the panic, hope fought its way through the fog. He dialed his brother. He needed someone sane, someone who could help him think. 4:30 a.m. The call connected. His brother was confused, half asleep, but could hear the shock in Aaron's voice immediately. Aaron blurted out what he could. Masked men. Flashlights. Denise taken. Drugged. Tied up. They're gone. And his brother, alarmed but focused, said the words Aaron was too afraid to say himself. Call the police. Aaron hesitated. They said, if I report it, call them. Now. The fear of doing the wrong thing nearly froze him again. But this wasn't something he could solve alone. So at around 5 a.m., still trembling, still half-drugged, still terrified, he dialed 911. The operator picked up. Aaron's voice shook, not in hysteria, but in the kind of shattered restraint that made him sound almost numb. He tried to stay coherent, but his speech still dragged from whatever they'd given him. He explained what happened as best he could. The response from dispatch was cautious, but not disbelieving, not yet. They sent officers immediately. Within the hour, Vallejo police arrived at Aaron's home. They expected maybe a burglary, maybe a domestic violence situation, maybe a drug issue. They were not expecting what he described. But as officers moved through the home with flashlights, something changed in the air. They noted there were no signs of forced entry, no broken glass, no damage to the front door. And as Aaron tried to describe the intruder's instructions, the pre-recorded message, the demands, something behind the officer's eyes shifted. One of them looked at another, a quick glance, a silent note of suspicion. It was subtle, but it had already begun. They didn't think Denise was kidnapped. They thought Aaron Quinn was lying. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know yet, was that in just a few hours, he would no longer be treated as a victim. He would become the prime suspect. And Denise, the woman currently bound, blindfolded, and locked in the trunk of a kidnapper's car, would be accused of staging her own abduction. By sunrise, the house was crawling with officers, crime scene techs, and detectives, but their body language made something clear. They weren't urgently mobilizing a missing person search. They weren't organizing search dogs. There were no Amber Alert protocols, no helicopters, no calls to the FBI. Instead, they pulled Aaron aside, sat him down, and closed the door. The tone changed immediately. Not sympathetic, not investigative, not urgent. Interrogative. Two detectives entered. One calm, one already wearing the look of a man convinced. Aaron sat across from them, pale, exhausted, eyes ringed red, the effects of the sedative still lingering in his bloodstream. He expected questions like, what did they look like? Did you hear anything distinctive? Did they take anything? Did they say where they were going? But instead, the first question was, "So, when's the last time you and Denise argued?" He blinked, confused. They continued before he could even answer. "You two just got back together, right? That kind of tension can cause things to escalate." He shook his head. That wasn't what happened. He tried to explain the intruders, the lights, the goggles, the pre-recorded message. He told them about the injections, the earphones, the threats, the zip ties, the moment they took her. The detectives exchanged a glance. Then one leaned back in his chair and said, "Aaron, look, if something happened, you're better off just telling us now." He froze. "Something happened," he said. "They took her." But it was too late. They smelled a story. They saw inconsistencies, not because he lied, but because he was traumatized, sedated, and still disoriented. None of that mattered. They had already decided. This wasn't a kidnapping. It had only been months since the movie Gone Girl hit theaters, the dramatized version of a woman faking her own abduction and setting up her husband. That story lived in the public imagination and law enforcement's. And now, as Aaron Quinn spoke, desperate and shaking, all they could see was Ben Affleck's guilty stare and Rosamund Pike's careful plan. Detectives started circling the same idea. Maybe there was no intruder. Maybe Denise wasn't kidnapped. Maybe she's not missing at all. Maybe he hurt her. Or maybe they staged it together. They confiscated his phone, his laptop, his clothes. They photographed his arms, his wrists, looking for defensive wounds, blood spatter, ligature marks that didn't align. They asked him to take a polygraph. He said yes, anything to help. Hours without sleep, still drugged, adrenaline crashing, hands shaking. They hooked him up to the machine, and he failed. Not because he lied, but because his nervous system was in crisis. And to the detectives, that was good enough. They pressed harder. "Did you get into a fight? Was she going to leave you again? Did you strangle her? Did you dump the body? Is this about money? Infidelity? Anger? Aaron, there is no kidnapping. Denise is not missing. You know where she is." He kept insisting. "They took her. She's out there. She needs help." But now, there were no officers searching the roads, no teams combing nearby areas, no bulletin alerts. They were focused on one thing only: getting Aaron Quinn to confess to something he didn't do. Meanwhile, miles away, blindfolded, drugged, bound, stuffed inside a kidnapper's car, and later a house she couldn't see, Denise was still alive. She didn't know how long she'd been unconscious. When awareness returned, it came in fragments. Sounds before vision, fear before thought. A low hum, the throb of motion, fabric against her skin, plastic restraints digging into her wrists. She was inside something, moving, a car trunk. The air was stale, her breathing quickened against the tape across her mouth. She could feel the hum of tires on pavement beneath her. She couldn't see anything. Blackout goggles sealed tight to her face. Her ears were muffled, but not plugged now. Every sound was amplified inside her own head. The rattling of tools, the faint creak of metal, the occasional shift of weight near her feet. She tried to move. Her legs were tied. Her hands were bound. And she was wearing earbuds again. But this time, no message was playing. Just faint static. The fear didn't arrive in one wave. It climbed her body like ice. Had they killed Aaron? Were they going to kill her? Was this about money or something darker? She swallowed hard, heart pounding so violently she could feel it in her temples. Time became distorted. Minutes felt like hours, or maybe they were. Eventually, the car stopped. Doors opened. Footsteps. The trunk lifted. A rush of cold air hit her face as gloved hands dragged her out. She didn't scream. She couldn't. Her mouth was still covered. They carried her into a house. She could tell by the shift in temperature, the echo of footsteps, the softness of carpet under her shoulder as she was lowered to the floor. She braced for assault. Violence. The worst. But instead, she heard someone speaking near her ear. Calm, deliberate, mechanical. "This is not sexual. You will be safe if you comply." Another voice. "This is a ransom operation. Your boyfriend will follow instructions." She lay there, trembling. She didn't believe them. She couldn't. For all she knew, Aaron was dead in their bedroom and she would be next. Time lost shape. She was fed small portions, water, packaged food, just enough to function. She heard at least 2 male voices, maybe 3. No names, no personal language, no slip-ups. And on the first night, everything changed. She heard the sound before she understood it. Gloves snapping on, footsteps approaching, weight shifting on the mattress. One captor got close. Too close. And even though they'd promised this wasn't sexual, he assaulted her. It was controlled, quiet, clinical, like he'd rationalized it to himself long ago. And afterward, he repeated the lie. This is not sexual. This is just part of the process. Denise didn't scream. She went still. She survived it by leaving her body, by not reacting, by letting her mind float somewhere he couldn't reach. He left the room as casually as he'd entered it. And she lay there, blindfolded, wrists aching, silently praying she would make it out alive, even if no one believed her. While Denise was enduring captivity, her kidnappers made contact again, this time to law enforcement. They emailed from an anonymous address, offering proof of life, outlining demands, and threatening consequences if the story wasn't handled as instructed. The email referenced details the kidnappers shouldn't have known unless they were involved: the house layout, the timeline, the methods they'd used, and Denise's condition. It should have changed everything. Instead, police dismissed it. They called it a stunt. They called it desperation. They said, he's faking communications to support his story. Even as the kidnappers were literally confirming the abduction, law enforcement doubled down on their theory. They didn't send out alerts. They didn't escalate the case to the FBI. They didn't organize a search. They focused on discrediting the man who reported her missing. And the clock kept ticking. After 2 days in captivity, drugged, blindfolded, assaulted, and held in total isolation, Denise was suddenly told the plan was changing. A captor guided her, still blindfolded, into a vehicle. No explanation, no negotiation, no apology. She sat silently, hands folded, trying not to shake. They drove for what felt like an hour, maybe more. When the car stopped, she was led onto a street. A voice gave instructions. Count to 10. Remove the goggles. Walk forward. Don't look back. Then the footsteps retreated. Silence. Her breathing was the only sound. She counted, slowly, trembling. 1, 2, 3. When she removed the goggles, the world rushed in. Sunlight, air, cars. A residential street in Huntington Beach. They had dumped her near her mother's home. Disoriented, exhausted, traumatized, she approached the nearest house she recognized. The homeowner heard a knock. A familiar voice, shaky, strained. It's Denise. I need help. She was alive. And her very existence destroyed everything police insisted was true. When Denise knocked on that door in Huntington Beach, barefoot, shaken, and disoriented, the woman who answered could hardly process what she was seeing. Denise Huskins, the woman the world was already whispering about, was standing on her front step, alive, trembling, eyes red and hollow. The homeowner called Denise's father first, then authorities. You'd expect relief, shock, urgency. What she got was suspicion. When Vallejo police were notified Denise had reappeared, they didn't rush to protect her or get her medical treatment. They didn't launch efforts to locate her abductors. Instead, they treated her like a criminal. Officers arrived and immediately separated her from family, seized her clothing, bagged personal belongings, took her for questioning, ignored multiple signs of trauma. Rather than rushing her to a hospital, they transported her to the Huntington Beach Police Department for an interview. She was still exhausted, still drugged, still in shock. She had just survived 48 hours of captivity and sexual assault. But detectives weren't interested in what she'd endured. They were interested in whether she would slip up. In the interrogation room, Denise tried to recount what happened. The intruders, the basement, the rules, the voices, the assault, the email communications. But the tone across the table was cold. skeptical, aggressive. At one point, she asked for a lawyer. They told her she didn't need one. They questioned her for hours, even as she showed visible signs of trauma and physical exhaustion. She repeatedly described being drugged and assaulted, but she could see they didn't believe her. The police didn't see her as a survivor. They saw her as a liar who'd been caught, and that belief would soon go public. While Denise was being interrogated, Vallejo police held a press briefing, and rather than announcing an ongoing search for suspects, they did something unheard of. They implied the victim had staged the entire thing, publicly, on camera, with her name. The department spokesperson, Lieutenant Kenny Park, told reporters the case had taken a surprising turn. Then came the biting line, "If you can imagine, this is like something out of Gone Girl." He accused Denise and Aaron of wasting police resources. He said there was no kidnapper. He said it was all a hoax. He claimed the department was considering filing charges against them, and the media, they ran with it instantly. Gone Girl hoax exposed. Kidnapped woman reappears. Police say she lied. Fiancé fails polygraph as victim resurfaces. By the end of the day, Denise wasn't just traumatized. She was humiliated on a national scale. But she remained calm, because survivors don't always get to collapse. She told investigators she'd cooperate. She told her family she just wanted the truth to come out. She told herself one thing: eventually, they'll know I was telling the truth. She had no idea how long that would take, or how dark it would get before then. While Vallejo police were patting themselves on the back for exposing a hoax, the man who actually abducted Denise wasn't done. He was watching. He saw the press conference. He heard the mockery. He saw law enforcement calling his crime a lie. And what he did next stunned everyone. Not because it was mysterious, but because it was so brazen. He emailed the San Francisco Chronicle, not the police, not the FBI, not the family, the press. The message came from a burner account, detailed and confidently written. It included a full account of the abduction, timelines law enforcement had ignored, methods used during the break-in, information only someone in the house could know, proof of life details previously dismissed. The kidnapper laid it all out, point by point, as if mocking the police for missing it. He even attached audio files and photos that only the abductor could have obtained. It was, in every sense, a confession. But the authorities doubled down. They publicly claimed the email was more proof that Denise and Aaron were staging things to cover their tracks. No apology, no retraction, no change in tone. Even the Chronicle didn't immediately blast it out. They forwarded it to officials first. But this time, something was different. The FBI saw it. And unlike Vallejo PD, they didn't instantly assume it was fake. They began quietly collecting digital evidence, comparing timestamps, examining file metadata. Within days, federal agents figured out something Vallejo PD never bothered to consider. The emails weren't coming from Aaron or Denise. They were coming from somewhere else entirely. As the FBI dug in, something strange happened in Southern California, several counties away. On June 5, 2015, a man broke into another couple's home in Dublin, California, not far from where Denise had been found. He wore black. He used a flashlight. He had zip ties. He drugged his victims. He threatened them. But this time, something went wrong. They escaped. He fled, and he left evidence. Inside the home and in the suspect's abandoned belongings were items shockingly similar to those used during Denise's abduction, especially the voice modulation equipment and goggles. Police traced the suspect to a Harvard-educated former Marine named Matthew Muller. A search warrant was executed. Inside his home and storage spaces, investigators found blackout goggles, restraints, stolen laptops, a stun gun, proof he'd been in Vallejo, audio recordings of Denise, drafts of emails sent to police and the Chronicle. And just like that, the Gone Girl hoax evaporated. Everything Denise and Aaron said was true. Everything police mocked was real. Everything the media ridiculed had happened, just as they described. Even after Muller's arrest, Vallejo PD did not rush to make it right. They issued no immediate public correction, no apology, no acknowledgement of the damage. Denise and Aaron were forced to hire lawyers just to stop being treated like suspects. The same department that refused to search for Denise was now quietly erasing its earlier statements. But the public memory holds on to shame longer than apologies, and the headlines began flipping. Gone Girl hoax exposed as real kidnapping. Vallejo police accused of negligence after suspect found. Kidnapper caught, couple vindicated. But vindication after trauma doesn't feel like justice. Not when you were blamed for surviving. Not when the world laughed before it listened. Denise refused to disappear, quietly. She became a voice for survivors disbelieved by the system. She spoke out about trauma, assault, media narrative, and institutional failure. She wrote and released a memoir, Victim F, From Crime Victims to Suspects to Survivors, with Aaron by her side. And when Netflix released American Nightmare, millions finally heard the story the way it should have been told in the first place. Not as a joke, not as a headline, not as a fabricated fantasy, but as a case of survival, and a system that almost destroyed her a second time. In the end, the truth wasn't uncovered by the authorities sworn to find it. It surfaced because a kidnapper couldn't resist correcting the record. It surfaced because the FBI listened when others mocked. It surfaced because Denise survived long enough to speak for herself. But the question that lingers is the one no press conference ever answered. What would have happened if she hadn't come home alive? Would anyone have searched for her body? Would anyone have looked twice at her captor? Or would her disappearance have been written off as theater and buried as myth? Denise didn't just survive a kidnapping. She survived a public dismantling. She survived being called a liar, a fraud, an actress in her own trauma. And when the world finally believed her, it was not with apologies, but with silence. Her name was cleared. Her kidnapper was sentenced. But the damage left behind, the smirks, the headlines, the accusations, cannot be undone. She and Aaron rebuilt their lives not because justice delivered closure, but because they refused to be erased by the people who failed them. And maybe that's the darkest part of this entire story. The man who took her captive wore a mask. The system that silenced her did not. If this story shocked you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another case on True Crime After Dark.